All right. Ready to dive deep into something you might think you already know all about. Air.
Yeah.
But trust me, there's way more to it than meets the eye.
Yeah.
You sent over this chapter from a science textbook called Air Around Us, and wow, it's pretty fascinating.
It really is. It's incredible how we just, go through our lives surrounded by this substance. We're constantly breathing it, relying on it.
Right.
But most of us never really stop to think about what air actually air.
Yeah, exactly.
This chapter tackles that head on, starting with a simple fact that air, while invisible, takes up space.
Like that experiment they describe where you try to push an upside-down bottle underwater.
Oh, yeah, right.
The water can't get in because the air's already there.
It's such a great visual, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's not just bottles and water. Think about all the seemingly empty spaces around us. They're not really empty at all. They're filled with this invisible, this mixture we call air.
So air is everywhere. It's taking up space. But what's even in this invisible cocktail? The book breaks it down, and I was surprised to learn that so much of it is nitrogen.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Almost 80% nitrogen, to be exact.
Wow.
It's fascinating because, we tend to think of oxygen as the star player.
Right.
But nitrogen plays a critical role, too.
Yeah, so...
You see, pure oxygen is actually quite dangerous.
Oh, right, yeah.
They think about those warnings on, like, oxygen tanks and flammability. Nitrogen actually dilutes the oxygen.
Interesting.
Making it safe for us to breathe.
It's like nature's way of keeping things in balance.
Right.
But this chapter doesn't just talk about what air is. It also goes into what it does. I mean, the most obvious thing is, well, it keeps us alive.
Absolutely. That whole section on oxygen and breathing, it's like a mini survival lesson.
Right.
Do you remember that experiment with the candles where you cover a candle with a glass and it goes out?
Oh, yeah.
Because it runs out of oxygen?
That one always made me think about those stories you hear about people trapped in airtight spaces.
Oh, gosh, yeah. It really highlights how vital that constant supply of fresh air is. But here's something that really blew my mind.
Yeah.
Air isn't just floating around up here.
Oh.
The book says it's also dissolved in water.
You're absolutely right.
Really?
Yeah. Imagine, like, a fish tank.
Yeah.
You've probably seen those tiny bubbles clinging to the sides.
Right.
That's dissolved air escaping. Fish breathe that oxygen. Just like we breathe the air around us.
Oh.
And it's not just fish, all those tiny creatures living in the soil. They need air, too.
So those little air pockets you see in the ground.
Yeah.
That's their oxygen supply.
That's their lifeline.
That makes me think about earthworms coming up to the surface after a heavy rain.
Oh.
I always thought they were just trying to, avoid drowning.
Yeah.
But maybe it's because the water flooded their underground air supply.
It very well could be. It just goes to show how interconnected everything is, We tend to think of air as separate from the ground, the water.
But it's all part of this really intricate system.
So we've got all these creatures, right? On land, in the water, all breathing oxygen.
Right.
But how does the Earth not just run out?
That's where the amazing oxygen cycle comes in. This chapter does a good job of explaining how plants play a crucial role.
Yeah, I was wondering about that.
Through photosynthesis, they take in carbon dioxide, which is what we breathe out.
Right.
And they release oxygen. And here's the key. They release more oxygen than they consume.
So that keeps the balance.
Exactly. It keeps everything in check.
It's like this perfectly choreographed dance between plants and animals.
It really is.
But I'm curious, what happens when that balance gets disrupted? We hear all the time about, deforestation and how it's harming the planet.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it highlights a crucial point. The oxygen cycle, as efficient as it is also delicate. When we lose these huge areas of forest, we're not just losing trees.
Right.
We're losing a major source of oxygen production.
It's a stark reminder that the air we breathe, while it seems abundant, it's actually a resource that needs to be protected.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's true. We often take for granted just how powerful air can be. This chapter talks about wind.
Right.
Which is just air in motion.
Yeah.
But think about, like, the force of a hurricane, or how wind can carve these canyons over time.
Wow.
That's air, shaping the landscape of our planet.
It's incredible, yeah. And then there's, like, the gentler side of wind. How it helps sailboats glide across the water.
Oh, right.
Or lifts a kite high in the sky.
Yep.
It makes you wonder what a world without wind would be like.
Yeah, it would be a very different world, wouldn't it? No rustling leaves, no billowing sails, even the sound of the wind, whistling through the trees, that would be gone.
Right.
It's a good reminder that air isn't just about breathing, it's about movement, energy.
Yeah.
It makes our world so dynamic.
It's like that saying, still waters run deep. But in this case, it's the moving air that has all the depth and impact.
Exactly.
Speaking of impact, the book also talks about how air isn't always pure.
Oh, right.
There's dust, smoke, all kinds of things floating around in it.
Yeah, absolutely. The chapter mentions how, burning fuel produces smoke.
Right.
And that releases all these harmful gases and particles into the air. It even talks about those tall factory chimneys.
Oh, yeah.
They were designed to carry the smoke away from populated areas.
But doesn't that just mean that the pollution is traveling somewhere else?
Well, that's a valid point. It raises the question of, responsibility, the unintended consequences of our actions.
Right.
We might think we're solving a problem locally, but it's important to consider the bigger picture.
Yeah.
What's the potential impact on a larger scale?
It makes you realize that clean air isn't something we can take for granted. It's a shared resource. We really need to be careful with it.
Absolutely.
On a more individual level, the book mentions how our bodies have these, amazing built-in air filters.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Our noses, have those tiny hairs and the mucus.
Right.
They trap the dust particles before they reach our lungs. It's amazing, isn't it?
It's like our own personal air purification system.
Exactly.
But even with those filters, it's clear that air quality can be very different depending on where you are.
Oh, for sure.
I was hiking in the mountains a few weeks ago, and the air just felt so, crisp and clean.
Oh, yeah.
Compared to being in the city.
Right.
It felt like I could breathe more deeply.
That's a perfect example of how the composition of air can really impact us. Our senses and even our well-being.
Yeah.
The air in a forest or like a mountainous area is often, much cleaner.
Right.
Fewer pollutants, higher concentration of oxygen.
Yeah.
It's such a contrast to the air in a busy city.
Right.
You've got exhaust fumes, industrial emissions, even dust from construction sites.
Yeah.
All that can contribute to poorer air quality.
It makes you think about how important it is to just be mindful, of the air we breathe.
Yeah.
Not just in terms of pollution, but just in terms of finding those places where the air feels really refreshing and invigorating.
Absolutely.
But this whole deep dive has also made me realize that air is more than just this physical substance.
Oh.
It's also like a powerful symbol.
That's a really fascinating observation. The book focuses on the scientific aspects of air.
Right.
But you're right, there's this whole other dimension to explore.
Yeah.
Just think about how we use the word air in everyday language.
Right, yeah.
We talk about having an air of confidence or feeling light as air.
It's true. Air is often associated with freedom, spaciousness, the ability to breathe easily.
Right.
And then there are those darker associations too.
Yeah.
Feeling suffocated by a situation.
Or gasping for air when you're stressed.
Yeah.
It's like air has become a metaphor for our emotional and psychological states.
It's a powerful reminder that even something as, seemingly invisible as air can have a really profound meaning in our lives. It's woven into our language,
Right.
our culture, even our subconscious thoughts.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to the many layers of air. From its scientific properties to this symbolic significance.
Yeah.
But before we wrap things up, I'm curious what you think about this.
Yeah.
The book mentions air being essential for life, but it doesn't really get into what happens when that air is no longer breathable.
Right. Right. That's an important point. And it brings up the critical issue of air pollution. We've been talking about the natural components of air.
Right.
But human activity has introduced a whole bunch of pollutants.
Yeah.
And they can have devastating consequences, both for human health and the environment. Yeah, it's a sobering thought. We think about pollution, in terms of water or land.
Right.
But the air we breathe is just as vulnerable.
It is.
It really makes you realize that clean air, it's a precious resource. Protecting it, it's essential for our survival.
Absolutely. And understanding the science behind it.
Yeah.
Air pollution.
Right.
It can empower us to make better decisions.
Right.
And to take action to improve air quality.
Sure.
Whether that's, supporting policies that promote clean energy or just making, individual choices in our own lives
Yeah.
to reduce our emissions.
Absolutely.
Every effort counts.
This deep dive has been quite a journey, hasn't it?
It really has.
We started with like the very basics of what air is,
right?
How it keeps us alive.
Yeah.
And now we're talking about, this delicate balance of the oxygen cycle and the threats from pollution.
Yeah.
It's amazing how something we take for granted is actually so complex and crucial to, well, our existence.
It's a testament to the power of curiosity.
Yeah.
We started with just this chapter from a science textbook.
Right.
And look where it's led us.
I know. From the composition of air to, like, these metaphors we use.
Yeah.
In everyday language.
It's like that ripple effect.
Yeah.
One idea leads to another.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're seeing the world in a completely new way.
I know. I'm definitely looking at the air around me a lot differently now.
Yeah.
But before we go, I have one last question. The book focuses on the scientific aspects of air. But we were talking earlier about how there's so much more to it.
Right.
What about the cultural significance? Throughout history, air has been associated with breath, with spirit, even freedom.
It really is fascinating how something invisible can have such powerful symbolic meaning.
Yeah.
Think about like the myths and legends around wind gods or storms, or how, ancient civilizations viewed air as one of the fundamental elements of the universe.
It's like air has this mystical quality, even though now we understand, all the science behind it.
Yeah.
I was reading about how in some cultures, breath is seen as like the very essence of life. It connects us to, something bigger than ourselves.
It speaks to that human need to find meaning, connection, even in the seemingly mundane.
Yeah.
We breathe air constantly, don't even think about it.
Right.
Yet it's this invisible force that sustains us, links us to the world.
Well, as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm left with this feeling of wonder and appreciation for the air we breathe. It's a reminder that even the most familiar things can have these hidden depths and unexpected connections.
That's the beauty of learning, isn't it? Opens our minds to new possibilities. Helps us see the world with fresh eyes.
Well said. So, to everyone listening, keep exploring. Take a deep breath. Feel the air on your skin. Yeah. And think about everything we've discussed. Air is more than just a scientific fact. It's a vital part of our world, our lives, and our stories.
Until next time, thanks for joining us on this journey into the air around us.
It's been a pleasure.